Fandom culture is something that is nearly impossible to predict. What shows will explode in popularity with a massive following and which ones will fall into obscurity can at times almost appear random. Sometimes a show doesn't reach decent viewership until after it's cancelled. In the past, this was due to DVD sales, which could sometimes lead to more content, but now in the age of social media, that has become simultaneously more easy and difficult. With it being more likely that someone will randomly stumble across their new favourite show, but also much simpler for network executives to simply ignore the fan demand. But that's a deeper topic to cover some other time. Today we're going to be talking about what happens when a particular character becomes so popular and their following so dedicated it entirely eclipses the popularity of the protagonist in the process, to a point where more people are aware of the character than the show they come from. The Varian video is something I have been teasing for over 2 years ever since my original retrospective on the Tangled franchise, but every time I tried to make it, the universe stepped in and went, nah. The first time my recording got corrupted, the second time was around when I started to become very dissatisfied with my content, so I put it on the back burner, and around last summer I was finally ready to get it done when the showrunner slash creator of Tangled the series, Chris Sonnenberg, signed an agreement with the Daily Wire to spearhead their new kids entertainment division with a focus on creating anti-woke content that upholds conservative Christian values, which roughly translates to a strong stance against representation of minorities and diversity in children's programming, causing certain crew members from Tangled the series to speak out about what a terrible person and boss he was. The original concept of this video was a look at the entire Varian timeline and discussion about all the conflicts that arose between the fans and the showrunner, where I tried to look at it from both sides and give the benefit of the doubt. Needless to say, I'm not exactly comfortable doing that anymore, so I decided not to make that the main focus of the video and instead only talk about it when I have to. With that out of the way, let's begin. You ever love a show but find the main characters are just a tad too developed? Then perhaps it's time you try side characters. Take any beloved cartoon from the previous decade and you'll likely find the fandom would often focus on one of the secondary characters. Now from my perspective, this can happen for a lot of reasons. It can be so freeing in fandom content to play around with characters who didn't get a lot of detailed development in their source material. While the main characters are incredibly defined to a point where it can be difficult to write a story around them while following all the continuity and keeping with how they act in the show, writing new ideas and stories around a character that doesn't appear in every episode can both be easier and a lot more fun. You have the basic personality, but depending on the character, the rest can be a blank canvas. They can create their own backstory for the character, give them fun hobbies, develop their relationships, or just really flesh them out beyond the limits of their screen time. Heck, sometimes the headcanons people come up with for these characters can become so universal and widespread that they eventually make their way into the show itself. Fans can also be drawn to other aspects of a non-main character. Because a side character isn't likely going to appear in as much marketing for the series, this gives the designers a lot more freedom to create a fun character design without network executives breathing down their necks to make sure they're catering to certain demographics. As a result, a lot of side characters often have fun visual quirks that really help them stand out, and in certain cases can look more visually interesting than the main characters. Then there's the possibility said character has a celebrity voice actor and can only appear every so often so as to not break the show's budget. This is kind of a special case where even before the character makes their debut, they will already have a fan base just based off people who follow that actor. Not a side character, but how many people do you think started watching DuckTales because David Tennant plays Scrooge? And there's that same idea of freedom when it comes to representation. Most of the time, the secondary or even tertiary characters in a series is where you have to look in order to find some LGBTQIA+ rep or characters that are neurodivergent coded, meaning a character that shows many signs and traits of having autism, ADHD, etc., but never actually gets confirmed by the show proper. So fans are naturally going to become fixated on the characters they connect with and feel the most represented by, even if they only appear in a handful of episodes per season. Now that we've established all the various factors as to why certain characters rise to prominence within any given fandom, let's take a look at some examples and see what categories they fall into. Now everyone remain calm. it's time to talk about Amphibia again. Marcy Wu was the most anticipated character of Amphibia's entire run. After spending an entire season focused on Anne and Sasha's broken friendship, with only a few mentions of the third member of the trio, the entire fandom was waiting with bated breath to see just who Marcy would be. Was she just as bad as Sasha? Even worse? What role would she play in the greater narrative? Well, on August 15th, 2020, those questions would finally start to be resolved. Turns out Marcy was none of those things, instead being an excited goofball with an endearing lack of self-awareness, plus a tendency to zone out who struggles in social situations and loves talking about her nerdy hobbies. I think you can already tell why the fandom was instantly drawn to her. Marcy was as neurodivergent coded as you could possibly get without actually confirming it in the show. Her love of the found family trope and JRPGs made it easy for fans to relate to Mama because she was essentially a reflection of the fans. Despite having the least amount of screen time of the Calamity Trio by a wide margin, what basically set Marcy up to be the talk of the town was her intrinsic link to the plot. Throughout Season 2, there were various little hints that Marcy knew far more than she was letting on and perhaps had some ulterior motives. And in the Season 2 finale True Colours, hearts around the world were shattered when we learned Marcy got them stranded in Amphibia on purpose. And if that wasn't enough to keep the discussion about her going, Marcy came into the series right before the halfway point and took the fandom by storm because she was a lovable character the audience could deeply connect to, but also very flawed and ripe for further exploration, which has continued even after the show ended almost a year ago. But she also signified a shift in the tone and direction of the series, which from that point on started to get far more mature and plot heavy, a momentum that would take them all the way to the finale. In a way, you could say Marcy's arrival completely transformed the show. Why else would the only new material released after the show, and potentially the last piece of official Amphibia content we'll ever get, be a book that continues to expand on her journey and character? Now let's talk about one of my favourite TV shows ever, Clone High. Originally airing for 13 episodes on MTV in the early 2000s, Clone High was a series about clones of famous historical figures attending high school that was a parody of angsty teen dramas of that era, that through its parody was still able to craft likeable characters and compelling stories while also being one of the most effortlessly funny shows ever written. In 2020, HBO Max made the announcement they would be reviving the series for an additional 2 seasons, and the at the time cult following rejoiced. And they did this the only way our generation knows how: memes. And soon these memes started to be spread around like wildfire, especially the ones involving a specific character.
Nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys!
For a good month or so, you could not escape Clone High's JFK, leading to many people discovering the show for the first time and building hype for the upcoming revival. Now, JFK does sort of buck one of the trends when it comes to these kinds of characters, because instead of being left underdeveloped by the show, he was arguably one of the most fleshed out and complex characters during the original run. Sure, he was a womanizing creep and essentially filled the role of the bully jock archetype, but when he was given his own storylines instead of being the antagonist, he proved to be a very compelling character. Things like questioning his sexuality or processing the death of his best friend, the latter of which perhaps being the show's best episode.
Pawns, I'm gonna sleep here next to you. I was in a coffin with a dead guy!
And by the end of the season, he's really one of the only characters to have undergone some real development.
You're a real knockout Betty, Joan. And a better Betty when you're not faking being a slutty whore.
You mean you like me when I'm just me?
Ring-a-ding-ding.
So this isn't really a case of the fandom wanting to flesh out something that the show barely touched. It is admittedly to do more so with other aspects of his character. Be it his unique and hilarious voice, or his design, which even in a show as visually distinct as this one stands out. Especially with that massive, bulbous, round, hair, though a lot of his appeal does just come from him being the funniest character on the show. And I am so excited to see more of him once these clones are finally unfrozen later this year. And yes, I'll likely be making a video about it. Professor Venomous from... Oh, right, forgot. That show no longer exists. Silly me. Professor Venomous was hinted at in early season 1, but made his first formal appearance in episode 20, We're Captured. A supervillain who feels he has fallen into a rut and is looking for something to bring the spark back into his life, which he finds in the main villain of the series, Lord Boxman, whose obsession with fighting heroes and destroying Lakewood Plaza turns out to be exactly what Venomous is looking for. From there, the two would develop their relationship during season 1, as viewers were definitely noticing something a bit, fruity about them. But it wouldn't be until season 2 where PV would explode in popularity, where he and Boxman officially become business partners and form a little family with their minions. Venomous was certainly a case where his popularity completely overtook the show he was from, in a sense also becoming a gateway for people to discover. I mean, he became a Tumblr sexy man for crying out loud. And he pretty much ticks all the boxes, plus a few more things on top of that. His and Boxman's explicit romantic relationship was a sight for sore eyes, as even today the media landscape is seriously lacking men-loving men representation, especially in the realm of animation. That, plus being a devoted father/carer, having a mysterious past, and being a kind of but not really reformed villain, made him basically destined to become most recognisable character. And maybe someday I'll actually be able to talk about the show.
We make a pretty good team after all, eh, Boxy? Yeah.
Now, the final example we're going to discuss before moving on is a little bit different, because we're talking about when fan theories and headcanons surrounding characters become so widespread that they eventually become canonized in the show. There are two modern examples I can think of when it comes to this. The first being the various background characters on My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic, where fans use the ponies' designs and appearances to come up with ideas of their personality and backstories which were widely accepted by the fandom. Then, to celebrate the show's 100th episode, the staff created a story entirely about exploring the incidentals that basically confirmed every single one of these interpretations to the extent Hasbro would allow. The other big example being the ship of Tweek Tweek and Craig Tucker from South Park. In season 3, the show did an episode titled Tweek vs. Craig, which was the first time either of these two random third-tier characters had interacted. In the episode, the kids at South Park Elementary coaxed the two boys into fighting despite neither of them having much interest. And the story wasn't really about them at all, more so the ways the main characters tried to manipulate them. And this is where the ship was truly born, because if you know anything about fandoms, you'll know the favourite trope is enemies to lovers. Tweek vs. Craig aired in 1999, and over the following 16 years, it would slowly build in popularity thanks to the rise of the modern internet, with fan art galore. As the story allegedly goes, a producer on one of the South Park games randomly stumbled across this section of the fandom and showed it to the creators, who decided to make an episode about it, even requesting for fans to send in their fan art to be used in said episode. In the season 19 episode Tweek x Craig, the entire town becomes obsessed with the art of the two 9-year-olds because they want to be seen as progressive, which of course makes them very uncomfortable. The boys come up with a plan to pretend to be together so they can break up and put an end to this whole thing, which starts to bring them closer. After the breakup though, the town falls apart, causing them to get back together, though this time remaining a couple. And that has been the status quo ever since. And while its origins are a bit messy, like most of South Park's representation, whenever the show has focused on these two, it's been taking the relationship seriously and making it feel like a natural part of the series. And the reason I'm talking about this will become clear very soon. And now it's time to finally address the reason this video exists, Varian from Tangled the series. How he quickly became the fandom mascot, and how the show majorly dropped the ball. If I were to ask who you'd think the most popular character from Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure would be, who would you say? Rapunzel? Eugene? Maximus? maybe even Cassandra. Instead, the fandom darling was this awkward nerd who, for 2 seasons of this show, only appeared in 6 episodes. But when you look at all the previous points I made about how a character like this can become so popular, Varian makes perfect sense.
I am an expert, and this is all perfectly safe.
Yeah, it does that all the time.
So much surrounding Varian was never touched upon in the show, which gave the fandom plenty of material to work with when it came to fleshing him out and creating their own headcanons about him and what his life was like both before and during the series. He has a very unique design with his goggles and apron as well as the blue streak in his hair, which, believe me, we'll talk about it. He was voiced by Jeremy Jordan, who is arguably one of the most well-known performers in modern musical theatre, who already had droves of fans who would watch anything he was involved in. And as far as neurodivergent coding goes, I know I certainly related to him, and I imagine a lot of others did as well. Varian was introduced in the very first episode of Tangled the series. Well, second if you count Tangled Before Ever After. He's a teenage alchemist who wants to revolutionize the world with the creation of hot running water, but his experiments often have a habit of ending in a disastrous explosion. He lives with his father, the leader of the village, and desperately seeks his approval, but can't seem to stop messing up. During most of Season 1, he becomes a very close ally to Rapunzel in her quest to understand why her hair grew back and stop the black rocks that threaten to destroy the kingdom. Also, he develops a crush on Cassandra, which was thankfully dropped almost as quickly as it was established. Now, from episode 1, Varian quickly rose in popularity in the fandom, but I would argue the hype surrounding him really didn't start taking off until we got into his arc. I think it's safe to say no one was expecting Varian to fall from grace and become the main villain of the show's first story arc. But it wasn't some out-of-nowhere plot twist like he was evil the whole time. He was merely a scared child put in a desperate position where he saw treason and abduction as the only way out. He wasn't just any bad guy, he was a sympathetic bad guy. Which meant while everyone was reveling in his devious monologues and epic villain song, they were also anxiously anticipating the moment he'd come back from the brink. Because reformed villains are a fandom's favourite plaything, and they would have to keep anxiously anticipating for nearly the next 2 years. You see, while Varian was insanely popular, fandom content involving him really started to take off during what I like to call the Great Varian Drought. At the end of Season 1, rather than being redeemed, Varian dug his heels in and was sent to prison with King Frederick promising to help him. Then Season 2 forgets about all that because it's time for a road trip! The Season 1 finale premiered on January 13th, 2018. And aside from one quick appearance in the form of an evil vision that's all in Rapunzel's head, we didn't see Varian again until the Season 3 premiere, which aired on October 7th, 2019. But while some lost interest in the show due to his absence, this essentially gave fans the freedom to run wild and explore what Varian might be up to, while the main cast were off fracturing their relationships and confronting the darkness that lurks inside them. And this is where a lot of the discourse began to emerge. While Season 2 was airing, people began to become increasingly more agitated that the show had essentially forgotten about Varian. And this tension reached a boiling point when the executive producer of the show, Chris Sonnenberg, said in an interview,
"These beautiful episodes are what's happening while you're waiting for Varian to come back." Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you're looking forward to something, and hopefully, I just don't want people to miss a beautiful show while they're waiting or complaining about a lack of Varian. Just enjoy this great show. It's like there's a beautiful narrative and there's great characters that are right there in front of you while you're waiting for this other character. And I just hope people don't lose the importance and the beauty of the episodes that we are giving people while they're sitting, tapping their toe, waiting for something else to happen.
And that was rather tame compared to how he would usually address this topic. You can see why people were pretty annoyed at this, telling a large part of the fandom that they're watching the show wrong. Because people can't control the things they enjoy or what aspects of a piece of media they become invested in. You don't choose that kind of stuff, it merely happens. And saying that those people are missing the point is perhaps the worst way you could respond. Fortunately, things would somewhat start to cool when the Great Varian Drought would finally come to an end. As with the start of Season 3, Varian would not only make his grand return, but be promoted to one of the show's main reoccurring characters. Rapunzel's return gave everyone the Varian redemption story they had dreamed of, and from there on, he appears in most of the episodes, not to mention his new outfit. And of course, since we're talking about a reformed villain, we get a nice bit of trauma and fear of falling again to really sell it. Pretty much for Season 3, everything was going smoothly for Varian fans, especially when he and Cassandra decided to deliver the best song of the entire show.
Whoopsie!
When I eventually do my Tangled the Series retrospective, I want to do everything I can to highlight the sheer talent that worked on this show, because this series was the result of hundreds of people collaborating to make art, and their hard work shouldn't be discredited by the shitty actions of one person. Back to the story though. In early 2020, as the series finale started to dawn on us and the fandom was getting ready to say goodbye to these characters, there were two things that made Varian fans a little nervous. Two questions linked with two topics: his hair and his mom. Basically, we got quite a lot of backstory on his dad, but nothing on his mother aside from a few vague mentions and this portrait. So that was one of the big questions fans had. Then there's the hair. You may or may not have noticed, but Varian has a blue streak in his hair. A nice detail to make the character design more unique, or something that will be incredibly significant to the plot. Okay, saying it out loud it sounds very silly, but that's part of the fun of being in a fandom. Over-analysing everything as if it's the missing piece of the puzzle. And considering how important both hair and the colour blue is to this series, you can see why people would come to that conclusion, especially considering his dad's backstory. So when the finale premiered, they didn't take too kindly to this joke.
What?
V? I don't want to alarm you, but the stripe in your hair... It's a lie!
Get it out! No!
This was seen as the show pretty much making fun of the fans for attaching too much importance to Varian, which while TV shows have made jokes at their fandom's expense for years, the way it was handled here, and especially the fact it was in the finale, wasn't the best move. While I don't think it was intended to come off as so mean-spirited, it feels like an attempt to acknowledge the fandom, then do nothing with it. The other shows I mentioned, when they acknowledged the fan theories or headcanons, they incorporated them into the show as a thank you to the fans for watching and supporting them, which is the reason they're able to keep making the show. This moment seems like they're trying to do that, but because they turn it into a misdirection and a joke, I can get why the fans would see it in poor taste. It would have been better had they not done this, and at the end people would have just gone, oh, I guess it wasn't important. Instead of calling it out and saying they were silly for reading into this, despite, again, these theories were not entirely unfounded. And that was kind of the end of it. Varian gets a happy ending, bringing hot running water to the kingdom and fixing his relationship with his father, and that's that. Or at least for most people it was. But for two very dedicated Varian fans who also happened to work on the series, they saw this ending as an opportunity. An opportunity to give Varian the narrative he deserved. The as of now final chapter in the Varian saga, Varian and the Seven Kingdoms, was a spin-off comic idea pitched by two storyboarders who worked on Tangled the series, Anna Lencioni and Kay Ritter. It was going to be this epic story where Varian leaves home to uncover the mystery of what happened to his mother. Joined by a new cast of characters, the series would have likely been as well crafted and emotional as Tangled while greatly expanding the world. However, none of that matters since it wasn't picked up. Yeah. Stay with me now, because it's about to get stupid in here. So apparently the Disney executives loved the idea of Varian and the Seven Kingdoms. Well, more so the Seven Kingdoms part, and not so much the Varian part. They didn't want to give it the go-ahead because of it being a Tangled product with a distinct lack of Rapunzel. The executives suggested retooling the concept to star an original character instead of Varian, but the two declined. Now, that is the official explanation as to why the series wasn't picked up, but I'd like to offer my own theory. Was it because the series didn't involve Rapunzel? Or might it have been because it was a spin-off of a series that the executives had sabotaged from the very beginning, and had the entire story not been greenlit from the get-go, wouldn't have made it past season 2? I'll let you be the judge of that one. Thus, we have made it to the end of the Varian story. While a lot of fans are still active to this day, now that the show has been over for nearly 3 years, it is natural that many have moved on to other side characters in other shows. When a new series begins, you never quite know the thing that's going to cultivate and grow a fandom. Even after I spent however long explaining it, you could still make an educated guess and be completely wrong. Because no one knows how people are going to react to something until it's out there. And if a creator is going to get involved in the fandom, they should do everything they can to foster that. Not dismiss them because they're not focusing on the parts of the show you want them to focus on, or discouraging them from theorizing. Because at the end of the day, a fan of a show is still a fan of the show, and they should be respected by the people making the show. And of course, that respect should go both ways. Fans should be respectful of creators too. So this video has kind of been all over the place, but then again, this topic is kind of all over the place. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed. This has been a very different kind of project for me, since this is the first time really branching out into general animation discussion. And I'm sure there's a lot of things that can be improved upon, but I'll get there. If you've made it this far, tell me down in the comments below some of your favourite fandom darlings. Aside from the ones I've mentioned in this video, I also love Scorpia from She-Ra and Sparkle Cadet from Craig of the Creep. But yeah, that's all I have to say, so until next time, I've been the Gladding Gladiator, reminding you all to keep creating. A huge massive thank you to the beautiful souls, the Wacky Deli, Jason S, Zombie Rex, ELS Art, Torai Matson, Resplendent Nova, Red Mustached Alien, and all of his reviews and shows for supporting it over on Patreon. If you want to help support the future of this channel, becoming a Patreon is the best way to do that. You'll also get exclusive access to an extended version of this video, but of course it's entirely optional, and I appreciate every single person who watches and enjoys my content. Thanks so much for watching folks, and I'll see ya real soon.